Great, thank you. I'm declaring a quorum and I'm calling the Metro Council business meeting to order for April 20th, 2023. Now the video.
For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
Wonderful. So we've declared a quorum, but Connor, could you please call the roll for attendance?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councilor Nolan.
Present.
Councilor Wong.
Present.
President Peterson is present, but is in transit and so is off camera. Councilors Gonzalez and Simpson are excused today, and Deputy Council President Lewis.
Present, thank you. So could we please now play the safety video for those in person?
Hi, I'm Justin Dunlap, and I'm the department head stagehand electrician at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. Safety's a big part of my job. From electrical, making sure that I stay up to date on the NFPA codes and regulations, to rigging, where we make sure that everything is safely suspended overhead, to egress, ensuring that our audiences, performers, and technicians have the safest possible route in case of emergency. I'm out here at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and you're in the Metro Regional Center. Please note that we're on the 3rd floor of the building. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the steps to the 2nd floor and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk. We will meet in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue.
Wonderful. So first item on our agenda is public communication. I'm going to add some clarification that today, for those listening in, there are 2 opportunities for members of the public to provide feedback on the proposed budget. We'll have an opportunity for public testimony before and after our budget presentations so that members of the public can give input even if they are unable to attend the full meeting. And then again, after our department presentations to allow for input on what has been discussed and presented today. For other items, public communication is now open. And Connor, would you please describe our procedures for this portion of the meeting?
Yes, thank you. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll be managing the timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you're joining us in person, you can sign up by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and then bringing that up to me. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can sign up by hitting the raise hand button. Depending on your version of Zoom, the raise hand button is within the reactions tab or has its own box at the bottom of your screen. For those attending on Zoom today, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist, so I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept that promotion. You'll need to click that box before you rejoin as a panelist, where you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. So with that, as a final reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical location. However, do please identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, I will look for some hands going up. And once again, folks, this is for non-agenda items. We'll have opportunities a little later in the meeting to comment on the MTIP as well as the budget presentations. So with that, Deputy Council President Lewis, I don't see any hands up in the audience, and there's been nobody sign up in advance to testify.
Great, thank you. So I will close public communication and move on to our consent agenda. As prepared, today's consent agenda consists of 8 items. 3.1, consideration of January 5, 2023 council meeting minutes. 3.2, consideration of January 12, 2023 council meeting minutes. 3.3, consideration of January 19, 2023 council meeting minutes. 3.4, consideration of January 9, 2023 council meeting minutes. 3.5, consideration of January 23, 2023 council meeting minutes. 3.6, consideration of March 2, 2023 council meeting minutes. 3.7, consideration of March 16, 2023 council meeting minutes. And 3.8, consideration of March 30, 2023 council meeting minutes. Councilor Rosenthal.
I would like to, if it's appropriate, move that the minutes from March 16th be withdrawn for correction. In some cases, all the votes of people online were not recorded, and it looks like we're passing things with only 3 votes.
So you don't need a motion there, but I will ask that we remove 3.7 from the consent agenda. So we're now down to 7 items. Colleagues, any other items you wish to pull or discussion? Wonderful. So consent agenda is now items 3.1 through 3.6 and 3.8. Can I have a motion?
Move adoption.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. Can I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. Moved by Councilor Nolan, seconded by Councilor Rosenthal. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous support, and staff will get to work with the corrections. Thank you for noticing that on 3.7, Councilor Rosenthal. For the next item on our agenda, we're going to move on to 4.1, 2024 to 27 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, MTIP. We're going to hear a short overview of the draft. The public comment period for this draft began on April 5th and is going to run through May 5th. And as part of the public comment period, a public hearing is being made available today at this council meeting. This morning, we'll have a short presentation on the draft, highlighting a handful of upcoming projects, and then we'll move into public hearing. Ted Leopold and Grace Chow are our staff. Ted is our resource development section manager, and Grace is our senior transportation planner, and they'll have a presentation.
All right, I'm just waiting for the presentation to be pulled up.
Yeah, it should pop up. It's up on Zoom now. It should be pulled up on our screens in the room in just a moment.
Bingo.
Great, thank you again. Thank you again, Deputy Metro Council President Lewis and members of the Metro Council for allowing me to present today on the 2024 through 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. I'll just go ahead and begin. Is there a way to advance slides?
Oh, you can say next slide to move forward.
All right, next slide, please. So to begin, I will just go over briefly what the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is. Next slide, please. Also known as the MTIP for short. The MTIP is a multifunctional document. First, it lists the regionally significant transportation projects and programs in the Portland metropolitan area which are scheduled to receive funding. Second, during its development, which is the process we're in now, the MTIP serves as a vehicle to align our transportation investments made by our various regional partners to implement and advance the regional goals and vision outlined in the Regional Transportation Plan. Then lastly, once the MTIP becomes effective, it outlines the administrative procedures for modifying that list of regionally significant transportation projects and programs, and it's scheduled to receive funding. Next slide, please. In terms of its purpose and functions, as mentioned previously, during its development, it's really an exercise on aligning those various transportation investments to advance our regional goals. It's also an exercise of ensuring that our transportation investments meet mandated federal requirements. And then once adopted, really the MTIP shifts into becoming a monitoring tool where it's tracking the implementation progress on those various transportation projects. And along the way, it's really managing the changes to those transportation projects and ensuring the availability of funds, and again, ensuring that those federal requirements continue to be met. Next slide. So the upcoming MTIP represents the list of regionally significant transportation projects scheduled to receive funding in federal fiscal years 2024 through 2027. Next slide. In total, just a brief summary, the 2024 through 2027 MTIP represents approximately $1.3 billion of transportation investments spread over 130 transportation projects and programs. As the table lays out at a high level in terms of different project types, it represents quite a mix of investments, which include projects to maintain and preserve the existing system, new capital projects to complete system gaps, operations type projects, which are intended to use technology to increase efficiency throughout the existing system. And then we have a handful of planning and regional programs. Next slide, please. So some individual projects to highlight that are currently included in the 2024 through 2027 MTIP include, we have the project development and construction phases of the Council Creek Regional Trail, which is a new multi-use path on the west side of the region. We have the 82nd Avenue Jurisdictional Transfer Project, which is a project encompassing a bit of state of good repair as well as numerous pedestrian safety capital repairs in an effort to bring 82nd Avenue, in an effort to transfer the ownership of 82nd Avenue from the state to the city of Portland. We have the Columbia Slough Bridge Replacement Project, which is a bridge maintenance project, as well as the Beaverton bus garage renovation, which is being led by TriMet, and this is a transit bus area renovation, which received actually a federal discretionary grant to make those various enhancements. Next slide. We also have the first of probably many National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Projects programmed in the 2024 through 2027 MTIP. This is actually a new funding program which came from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and it's intended to advance the deployment of electric vehicle infrastructure charging. And then lastly, there are a number of ongoing regional programs such as Safe Routes to Schools, regional travel options, which work on outreach marketing and the education side of transportation demand management. Next slide, please. So just briefly, Metro staff completed an analysis of the 2024 through 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program to see how that $1.3 billion package of investments would advance us towards our regional goals and objectives. In summary, we do see some slight progress towards our regional transportation goals and objectives. But again, it's very slight at this point in time. And just to place this broadly in context, that $1.3 billion being invested over the next 4 federal fiscal years is just a tiny portion of the broader $73 billion of proposed transportation investments and programs that has been outlined in the currently discussed 2023 Regional Transportation Plan. So the alignment of progress is actually probably pretty similar as to what we would expect based off of the investment level. Next slide. So just a few other high-level draft findings from the analysis of the 2024 through 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. At this time, the 2024 through 2027 MTIP does not include any large regional scale capital transportation investment capital transportation investments. We know that there are a number of those projects that are out there in development, but they will likely request inclusion through an amendment process in the near future, but at this time, they are not included in the MTIP. We know that those regional scale investments are really necessary to make some measurable gains towards our various regional goals and to actually implement our regional vision for the transportation system. But with that said, there's a number of smaller scale capital investments that are really working on addressing various community mobility needs, and those are definitely having an effect that's currently represented in the 2024 through 2027 MTIP. And those are definitely supporting those transportation needs in those communities, as well as helping us, again, make that slight progress towards advancing our regional goals and objectives. What we also see with the 2024 through 2027 MTIP is that we have a lot of competing priorities with significant need. You know, a key example is that we have about half of our investment profile addressing maintenance and preservation of the existing system. And we know that there is a very large backlog of those preservation and maintenance needs. At the same time, we recognize that there are a number of system completion gaps that are necessary, so those new capital investments. So it's really trying to look at where we're putting those limited dollars and which areas we can try to focus on. With that said, even though it's somewhat of a limited investment profile for 2024 through 2027, the capital investments in particular are really being invested strategically and trying to meet a number of multiple goals and objectives with what those capital investments are intended to do. So the set of examples that I would lean on is that there are a number of smaller scale pedestrian improvement or pedestrian capital investments that are outlined as part of the 2024 through 2027 MTIP. And those investments are being heavily focused in equity focus areas, addressing pedestrian crossing and mobility on our region's high injury corridors, so trying to address a safety issue at the same time. So it's being very mindful, those investments are being very mindful in trying to meet like multiple regional goals and objectives at once. Next slide, please. So where we are currently in the process is that the draft 2024 through 2027 MTIP has been released for public comment, which began on April 5th and will run through May 5th, which is also what brings us Metro staff here today to provide an opportunity to comment. Next slide, please. So the next steps in finalizing the 24 through 2027 MTIP, next slide. Following the conclusion of our public comment period in early May, Metro staff will review, synthesize, and respond to those public comments and develop our public comment report in May. With that information, we will also make any necessary revisions to the 2024 through 2027 MTIP and prepare an adoption draft. Following, Metro staff will then present the adoption draft of the 2024 through 2027 MTIP to TPAC and JPAC in June. And then in July, we will, Metro staff will request TPAC and JPAC to recommend adoption of the 2024 through 2027 MTIP, and we will return to council in July requesting that final action. Next slide. And with that, thank you, Metro Council Deputy Metro Council President Lewis, and the members of the Metro Council for letting me share a little bit about the 2024 through 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much. We'll start with Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. One question that you may have answered, but if you did, I missed it. You said that this package represents $1.3 billion worth of projects, but you said it doesn't include, I thought the number you said was $73 billion worth of other projects?
Oh, yes, I was trying to place,
What is that 73 billion?
apologies, Deputy Metro Council President Lewis, Metro Councilor Nolan. The $1.3 billion that represents the 2024 through 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, that was intended to help provide some broader context in that our current 2023 RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, the proposed constrained and investment profile represents about $73 billion worth of investments over 22 years. So it's really trying to lay out currently we have laid out about $1.3 billion investments, but over the next 22 years, we really need to make about $73 billion worth of investments to achieve our regional vision plan and goals.
And no time like the short term to start getting it on the right track, as it were. Madam President, may I follow up?
Please.
Thanks. I'm particularly interested and would appreciate it if we could go back to the slide on system evaluation of overarching goals. Connor, thanks. I'm interested in an overview of how those evaluations plus 0 minus are really boiled down. I'd like to get a little more flavor of how those evaluations are done. And frankly, given the preponderance of highway projects, even in this smaller package, it is hard for me to understand how we get to neutral on climate change. And the other one I'm particularly interested in is how we evaluated equity.
Deputy Metro Council President Lewis and in response, Metro Councilor Nolan, in response to your question about the system evaluation, and particularly as it relates to the climate change performance measures as well as the equity performance measures. The system evaluation follows pretty consistently with the process that we used in the most recently adopted regional transportation plan. So we were relying on the performance measures that we applied as part of the 2018 RTP. I know that there's been some modifications to some of those performance measures in the development of the 2023 RTP. The evaluation measures tend to focus on analyzing a lot the capital projects, and so those newer projects that are coming in, and that's fairly consistent in the same way that we applied it in the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. I do note the preservation and maintenance element in part because about half of the investment profile in the MTIP is actually projects related to preservation and maintenance. So ostensibly, a lot of those projects aren't really included as part of the analysis. So we're looking at a much smaller pool of capital projects that we end up evaluating in terms of the analysis. And at a large profile of those preservation and maintenance projects too are very heavily, I'd say, roadway and bridge focused. So it may on the outset have this sense of appearance of the profile of the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is very heavily weighted in that direction, but a lot of those projects tend to actually fall into just preservation and maintenance, in that they're repaving a roadway or replacing a bridge deck, or a key example that I can think of is repainting parts of I-405 on the Fremont Bridge, which is
Restriping, you mean?
if there it would be, we do look very closely at the project descriptions as to whether or not, say, a preservation project, if it does propose something slightly different in the context of, say, like a restriping, and whether we actually place that into a different category for the purposes of analysis. We are pretty stringent on looking at projects in the context of, are they really just maintaining the existing system that's currently on the ground there? But moving to your question, we used many of the same performance measures, and in looking at that much smaller universe of capital investments, what we really find is that those smaller universe of capital investments tend to be more active transportation, complete streets type projects that are on their own may provide a level of benefit, and as they aggregate up, continue to provide further and further benefit towards advancing the region towards, say, reducing our carbon emissions or advancing our equity goals. But it's making that progress at a fairly small incremental scale, is what we're finding. It's those investments usually combined with, say, a larger scale investment like into a new high capacity transit line or others, where we actually start seeing larger, that bigger jump in terms of how much more we can advance towards our regional goals and objectives. But at this time, there is not a larger scale regional capital investment that's included in this draft version of the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. So in trying to sum that up, summarize those measures very, very quickly, we're showing kind of that neutral to somewhat positive trend, because it's highly focused on those smaller scale community projects.
Thank you. It was a big question and one that could absorb hours of time, but not here, Madam President. If I might just summarize what I'm drawing from this conversation. This is a small fraction of federal and local resources to be invested over the next 4 to 20 years in transportation in the region. But nonetheless, it's non-trivial. $1.3 billion is a chunk of change. But we're ignoring, our methodology ignores about half of that investment because it's in maintenance and preservation. So then we have less than about half of a very small piece, and we're presenting information that seems to suggest that we are at least not doing damage to our climate goals, when it comes to that conclusion only because of what it's excluded. And we know from previous presentations that the planning department has provided us that we have consistently underinvested in the uncompleted public transit parts of our transportation system. And if we're then dedicating half, and that also means separately that we have underinvested in equity changes to our transportation system. And then we spend half of our money to preserve what was already a lopsided to the negative system, not so much transit-oriented, not so much equity-oriented. I think the numbers hide a secret that says we're really not doing much to get back on track, or to get on track for the first time with respect to climate change.
Is currently unavailable.
Oh, is that, Madam President?
That was not me. It's not the hook. It might be a good
And
reminder.
I'm almost done anyway. I just want to make the point that our measurement mindset, and this is generally us, all of us, including counselors who've approved it, misses the things we say are important: climate, equity. And I think we need to look at how we evaluate things in order to make the change necessary to really see fundamental improvements in climate resistance, climate stewardship, and equitable access and service.
And Ted, did you have anything to add or respond? And now you're on mute. Where you were not before. Okay, you're passing. Great. Counselor Wong.
Oh, great. Thank you, Deputy President Lewis, and thanks, Grace, for a great presentation. I think this might just be because this is my first MTIP and RTP cycle, but I'm wondering if you could talk more about the interplay between the two. You know, we spent the morning at JPAC talking about a new project list. And I guess kind of my questions are, I see you're doing an engagement process for MTIP, and I know there's a robust one happening right now for JPAC. How do they intersect and inform each other, you know, if they do? And also just on the sequencing, like, wouldn't it make sense to do the MTIP after this RTP? But it seems like they're happening concurrently. And yeah, I just wonder if you could explain why we sequence it this way.
Sure. Deputy Metro Council President Lewis and Metro Councilor Huang. I can answer a couple of those questions, and I actually will ask my manager, Ted Liebel, to help actually tag in with that. I think I'll start with the easiest question first in terms of the timing of the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Both the RTP and the MTIP are creatures of federal law, and they are obligated to certain schedules. The Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program has to be updated every 4 years, where the Regional Transportation Plan, after the 2018 RTP, actually went to a 5-year mandatory update cycle. So it just so happened the nature of the two ended up kind of falling on top of each other this cycle, whereas normally we would actually be somewhat staggered and being informed by each other. In terms of the interplay, the MTIP, and I'm going to say pun intended here, is the vehicle for the implementation of the RTP. Everything that is represented in the MTIP must be drawn from the financially constrained RTP, and that is one of our really stringent aspects that we look at the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program in doing that review of, are we meeting all of our federal objectives and requirements? In terms of the broader the question as it relates to the engagement work that's happening both at the RTP level as well as the MTIP side of things, the MTIP is made up of multiple allocation process decisions that have been undertaken over the past 3 years as we've actually gotten to this point where we're able to develop and draft and essentially present a project list to you. And those allocation processes include our Metro Regional Flexible Fund allocation process, which was undertaken, I believe, in 2021, and a final allocation decision completed in in late 2022. And each of those allocation processes undertake a number of steps around the engagement in the development of that decision process. We do, ODOT undertakes a number of processes as it's allocating its funds across its various programs and through its decisions, as well as our 2 transit agencies who also play key roles in the development of our Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. So at this stage of the MTIP, what we're actually showing is the reflection of all of those allocation decisions and the engagement processes that have been undertaken along the way. And we're kind of doing more of the packaging and wrapping up of that at this stage, and providing an opportunity for comment around those. As it pertains to the RTP engagement process, that first, we're ensuring that everything that's currently represented in the 24 through 2027 MTIP is actually represented in that 2023 RTP discussion, the project lists that they have moving forward, and the opportunities and discussion that's currently happening there. We are informed by the discussions that are happening both in that RTP development process, combined with taking what we've heard through all the allocations, as well as being informed through the development of the 2018 RTP. So we're taking a lot of that engagement work and trying to synthesize that towards the direction of how we actually shape this current this current draft MTIP that's in front of you today. And that's been kind of an ongoing process that we've been doing through the last couple of years as essentially the various allocation processes have taken place. So I apologize, I kind of backed into that question in trying to explain where the current comment period is really just a reflection of that kind of aggregate process, but there's been a number of touch points throughout the processes along the way.
Is there like an easy example we can provide of a different kind of question that you're hoping in the RTP engagement now versus in MTIP? What?
I'm trying to think of like a tangible example for us is that when the 2018 RTP was adopted, as part of the adoption ordinance, there was direction to the region about making near-term progress towards advancing equity, safety, climate, and mobility. The development of both the 2021 through 2024, as well as this current 24 through 2027 MTIP, has really used that lens in applying that direction towards the allocation processes that eventually get reflected in the MTIP. So both our regional flexible fund cycles had actually used that directive as kind of the key, in a sense, like guiding star in terms of the actual allocation. We work closely with with ODOT as well as our two transit partners to also discuss how those key regional objectives get applied within their allocation processes, and recognizing that our partner agencies are also balancing direction and objectives coming from their own leadership as well.
Okay, thank you. Looks like I have to do a little more homework on my end. Thank you.
Great. This is going to be our final council question. Councilor Rosenthal.
Okay, thank you, Interim Chair. Well, actually, I have a couple quibbles, a comment and a question. The comment is that from the priorities, it looks like we're prioritizing maintenance and preservation over all the other things that we keep saying that are our primary priorities. But my quibble is that I think the Council Creek Trail, for example, provides a fair amount of equity issues. And I think that both the EV thing, as well as potentially the bus barn and the Council Creek Trail, provide substantive climate change mitigation. So I think that those are not listed. They should be listed more as positive. The bus barn could be argued different ways. I have no idea what the Multnomah County or what the Multnomah Slough Bridge is. But my real question was, one of the slides listed, it said, and larger projects are requested to be added soon. And I go, which projects are you referring to? And it was unclear. I mean, do you mean the large elephants in the room, such as the IBRT and the I-205 and the downtown enlargement, the Rose Quarter project? Is that what they mean, or what? I'm not sure what that meant.
Deputy Metro Council President Lewis and Metro Councilor Rosenthal, yes, those were the elephants that were not specifically named, but we know are actively in development. Those projects at this point in time were not prepared to be able to be included in the draft 24 through 2027 MTIP. But as the council is aware, I want to say it's about a monthly frequency. It might actually even be more than that. My colleague Ken Loback comes with his regular MTIP amendment item requesting council approval of those amendments, and we know that those larger scale projects, when they reach a certain point, they will need to request inclusion in the 2024 through 2027 MTIP. So those are to come, but they're not quite ready for today.
Okay, I just wanted to make clear what those larger projects included. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm used to having to remember the names of our elephants like Samudra and Chandra and Samson and Rose too. So different elephants.
The MCAT is the MTIP is a meerkat, and pretty soon we're going to have elephants trundling all over their network.
Yep. Big animals. So thank you, colleagues. I'm going to cut us off in the spirit of trying to actually do an ambitious agenda today. And I'd like to move us into public hearing. I'm going to open public hearing on 2024-2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Connor, will you please describe for the audience our procedures for the public hearing?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. So if anyone wishes to testify on the 2024-27 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, now is the time to do so. If you're just joining us, public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll be managing a timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now by either virtually raising your hand on Zoom or filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing that up to me. For those joining on Zoom, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist, so I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept the promotion to a panelist. Once you click that, you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. As a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So I'll give folks to another chance to put their hands up. Once again, this is for the 2024-2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Councilors, we've had nobody sign up in advance to testify on this subject, and I still see no hands going up. Deputy Council President Lewis.
Great. I believe we've given it enough time. So seeing no testimony, I'm going to close our public hearing, and I'm going to actually move us into agenda item 4.2, which is a public hearing on the 23-24 proposed budget. I will open the public hearing on the 23-24 proposed budget. And I want to remind those tuning in that there will be another opportunity at the end of our meeting to provide testimony on the proposed budget. Connor, will you please describe our procedures?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. So once again, folks, testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and if you are joining us virtually, I will be promoting you up to a full panelist, and testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. So this is the time to testify on the FY 2023-24 proposed budget. We have had some folks sign up in advance to testify, councilors. So first up, we have, Jackie Kerouac-Fram. So Jackie, I'm going to go ahead and promote you up. All right, Jackie, you should be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. You'll have 3 minutes, and your time will begin when you begin speaking.
Good morning, councilors. I'm Jackie Kerouac-Fram. I'm the Executive Director of the Rebuilding Center, and I'm here on behalf of the Portland Reuse Collective, a group of 5 reuse and equity-focused organizations: Rebuilding Center, Community Warehouse, Community Cycling Center, Free Geek, and Repair PDX. And I'm here today because reuse is mentioned 89 times in the 152-page 2030 Regional Waste Plan, but it's only mentioned twice in Metro's current forecasted 389-page annual budget. No investment is being allocated toward reuse organizations. One reason might be because reuse is usually seen and treated as a materials management practice. And the impact of reuse can feel pretty abstract and not at all urgent, especially when we truck our waste hundreds of miles away to rural communities. But I'm here today to convince you that reuse is an urgent practice that affects people. In addition to keeping millions of pounds of material out of Eastern Oregon's landfills, our organizations use those materials to increase housing stability, digital inclusivity, and affordable housing preservation for communities most at risk of displacement in Portland and the Tri-County area. And collectively, we provide free or low-cost options for housewares, electronics, building materials, and transportation so people can afford to repair and furnish their homes and connect to the workforce. We are so much more than materials management, and due to consistent underinvestment or non-investment from public resources, we are all at capacity. To expand our work, we seek consistent funding from Metro. In addition to ongoing I&I grants, we need contractual funding that recognizes the important role we play in the solid waste management system, as well as in supporting Metro's efforts to combat climate change, maintain currently affordable housing, and support workforce development. Did you know that it costs an average of 26 times more to build a new affordable home than to repair an existing one? And that financial inability to perform repairs is one of the main reasons people eventually lose their homes and are displaced from their communities? The power of reclaimed materials, building materials in particular, given for free or sold at very low cost to support home retention and the preservation of currently affordable homes is immense. And at Rebuilding Center, we are only limited in this work by a lack of funding. Each of my partners in the Reuse Collective has a similar story. So how can Metro support our work? Most importantly, by providing contractual funding based on how much tonnage we divert from landfills and circulate back into communities, by amplifying our work and helping our communities learn where they can donate materials, and by providing free space for reuse operations. Metro does not have to figure out how to do reuse. We do this work every day. We are really, really good at it. We are culturally responsive and hold important, trusting relationships with the communities we serve. And as your partners, with real financial investment, we can help you advance all of your reuse, climate justice, affordable housing, and workforce development goals. So much more than materials management is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Hunter, could you please call the next person?
Yes, thank you. So next up, we have Anna Kernitsky. So Anna, you can sit at any of the 4 seats up here. You don't need to unmute, but feel free to move it closer to you if you'd like.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor President and council members. For the record, my name is Anna Kernitsky, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Warehouse, the only nonprofit furniture bank in the metro area. We collect and redistribute over 400 tons of donated furniture and household items to 7,000 low-income community members annually, furnishing 60 homes every week. I'm here to support Jackie Murphy, who just spoke from the Rebuilding Center on behalf of the Reuse Collective, to comment on Metro's proposed budget. Our agencies have been working collaboratively for years, but the Reuse Collective assembled more formally to submit a proposal for the Expo Center redevelopment with a goal of creating a reuse hub where we can co-locate and share resources, where a community can come to one central location to donate items for reuse, and ultimately to greatly expand reuse repair and meet the needs of our community that Jackie mentioned. Reuse is a high priority in the 2030 Regional Waste Plan, and we all acknowledge it's a higher priority in the materials management hierarchy than recycling and garbage. Despite this, the only goal in the 2023 budget that connects to reuse is Goal 16, to assess the region's current public, private, and nonprofit garbage, recycling, and reuse infrastructure. So assess the infrastructure. No investment in the following goals from the Regional Waste Plan. Goal 4.5, in partnership with community-based organizations, create workforce development programs within the reuse sector that focus on people with barriers to employment. Goal 8.2, implement strategies to increase the salvage of building materials for reuse. Goal 8.4, expand the collection of reusable items at public and private transfer stations in partnership with reuse and repair organizations. Goal 8.5, invest in neighborhood scale reuse and repair services and infrastructure. Goal 9.1, provide culturally responsive education and assistance for garbage, recycling, and reuse services to residents and businesses. There are several more goals, but I'll refrain from listing all of them. Reuse is a priority area for Metro, and there's a huge need for our organization services at the moment. For Community Warehouse, we've experienced a 150% increase in demand for our services in the last 18 months, partially due to the influx of supportive housing services funds to our partner agencies, and we do not have the resources, staffing, space, or truck fleets to collect enough furniture to meet this need. Yet we know there's enough circulating in our community. Furniture is one of the biggest contaminants in a landfill. We just need resources to ensure it's going to the right place. Reuse agencies have just not received ongoing public investment, and due to this, we are limited in our ability to respond to our community's needs. We are doing the most we can with the resources we can raise and earn on our own. The kind of impact we could have on our region with investments connected to the climate and equity goals from the Regional Waste Plan is massive. We are eager to work with Metro to meet these goals. We have the expertise to do so, and we are advocating for funding to actually invest in our reuse economy, acknowledging the environmental, economic, and social benefits in our region. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Perfectly timed.
Thank you. All right, I'll give, that is everybody we've had sign up in advance to testify, counselors, but I'll give folks in the audience another second or two to get their hands up. Once again, this is for an opportunity to testify on the FY 2023-24 proposed budget, and we will have another opportunity after the budget presentations. So with that, I do not see any other hands up in the audience. Deputy Council President Lewis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Councilor Nolan, do you have a quick comment before we move on to our budget presentations?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. I just want to vouch for both the Rebuilding Center and the Community Warehouse. I am personally aware of them, have volunteered there, have been a customer. They do fabulous work, and I endorse their suggestion that we find ways to partner.
Excellent. I think the regional system conversation is later in this agenda, so perfectly timed. Some of us also were able to hear about collaborative opportunities, and I hope that that spirit can move forward as well coming out of the expo process. So as we move into budget presentations today, y'all, we got a tight budget time allocation. We've got 4.3, which is our Planning Development and Research Department. We've got 4.4, which is WPES, and then kicking off the budget committee at 4.5. So I'm going to be watching to make sure that we get through all of these things. Please write down questions, knowing this is not our last opportunity on any of these subjects. With that, I'm going to call up Andy Shaw, Metro's Interim Planning, Development, and Research Director, to begin our presentation on the Planning, Development, and Research Department budget.
Good morning, Andy Shaw, still Interim Director of Planning, Development, and Research. Good to be with you this morning. I am joined here with Rachel Limbo, Finance Manager, Malou Wilkinson, a Program Director in the Planning Department. I think we're pulling up a slideshow. When you get there, let's just go to the second slide. So we're here, I heard the call for, let's move this quickly. We're trying to give a brief overview, but as comprehensive as we can. We'll first talk about the department's, the programs the department supports, as well as departmental revenues, expenses, FTE. Next, we'll discuss equity metric that we want to highlight today. There's lots going on in the department around racial equity, but we've been asked to bring one equity forward as an example. Highlight the budget modification requests that we have, and then finish up just discussing how the investments we're making support the key target areas the council's exploring coming out of the retreat earlier this year. So moving on to the next slide. This is, I hope you can see this, this is the layout of the overall planning department. I want us to walk through some of the programmatic work that's going on in the department, and then Rachel's gonna walk through revenues, expenditures, and FTEs, but I think it's important to understand the nature of the work that we're doing. So the first column there, transportation planning, provides long-term transportation planning and manages transportation resources in the region. You just heard from one of those groups. The first group there is the Long-Range Transportation Planning Team led by Tom Kloster. This includes development and coordination of the Regional Transportation Plan. You've been hearing a lot both here and at JPACT about the RTP, as well as planning for the future of transit, freight, active transportation, traffic safety, and other emerging issues such as shared mobility. The next team there, Transportation Resources led by Ted Liebold. You just had Ted and Grace come up and present on the MTIP. That's one of the major categories of work that they manage. I'll just note that Grace apparently just came back from running the Boston Marathon on Monday. So in addition to showing up today and giving a great presentation, just had to share that exactly. So first, the MTIP, the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. You just heard all about that. That's the ongoing management of federal funds in our region and includes the allocation of flexible funds through JPACT. Next, important to note, the Regional Transportation Options Program, that is grants for safe routes to schools and other options for travel, carpooling, et cetera, in effort to reduce greenhouse gases from the transportation sector. And third in this team is the Transportation System Management and Operations, or TSMO, program, which provides policy, support, and resources to make the transportation system more efficient through investment in intelligent transportation systems. So then moving to the next column, research. This is the group that was a separate department just a little while, some years ago, brought into the planning department. It was housed in planning before, became a department, came back into the planning department. So we have a budget modification in that team that I'll share later, but we're still in the process of sort of integrating them in, back fully after COVID into the planning department. The research arm provides a wide range of data and modeling services, both for our own internal processes, but also for external work that we do on a contract basis. A lot of that with ODOT on some of the major projects that you've talked about. I think we like to call them gorillas, maybe not elephants in the room. The research group consists of 3 teams, so modeling and forecasting led by Matt Bin. They develop and run the travel demand model. That not only supports the RTP process and development of that whole plan, but also, as I mentioned, other major projects in the region. So they do amazing work and are looked to as experts from not just within, but outside. They're also responsible for land use forecasting. This will be critical in the upcoming urban growth management process coming up this next year and a half. And they're also currently working on updating the greenhouse gas model to better estimate greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and land use. So something that we recognized a couple years back was not giving us the kind of information you have been seeking. So we're in the midst of updating that model now. Data resources in the research group led by Cindy Peterson provides a wide array of GIS data services and data applications to clients, internal and external again. So there's an enterprise portion and an internal support portion of our research group. This includes Metro Map, the HR dashboard that was developed for our own HR department, and the analysis of census data to support multiple projects and programs. Most recently, you may have, you remember working on, rejiggering the districts using census data. The last team there is data stewardship led by Madeline Steele. They're focused on the Regional Land Information System, or RLIS, which includes more than 150 layers of spatial data that supports strategic decision-making government. Both here, other governments, businesses can get in and access that data for a wide array of uses. All right, moving to the next column, investment areas. The first team there, investment areas, led by Kelly Betteridge, focuses on implementation of key regional projects. This includes transit system planning efforts like partnering with TriMet on the Better Bus program, focusing on smaller fixes and improvements to make buses move faster and more reliably. It also includes investment corridors work, including TV Highway and 82nd Avenue. Also support and representation for Metro on regionally significant projects like the IBR, Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge, and the Sunrise Corridor community visioning process. The next column, land use, led by Aaron Key, encompasses both our regional vision for how we're growing in this region, but also, I'm remembering Councillor Lewis's comment at the inauguration about the sign that points to Seattle, the sign that points to the Keller. Like, we can both think out long-term in land use and do immediate work on the ground. So land use planning, long-range urban growth management, supports your decision-making on the urban growth boundary process, as well as providing technical assistance to local jurisdictions as they work through their processes in thinking about urban growth boundary expansions, but also staying consistent with the regional framework plan. But then more immediately, 2040 grants providing funding to cities on improving development and readiness in cities, as well as support to community capacity building and small business support, some new areas for that 2040 planning and development grant area. The transit-oriented development team is also a part of this group, and they work with public and private developers to incentivize the kind of development that we're looking for in and around transit areas that the market is not providing. Their focus has really shifted in recent years to affordability in development, and they also support the housing department, the new housing department, by purchasing land through the Affordable Housing Bonds land or site acquisition fund. The last column there, community investments, currently led by Malou. We have a budget request in here to talk about to address that challenge. They provide direct support for community and equitable economic development. So the community placemaking grants, which you just were made aware of, the grants for this cycle coming out of a grant review process. Equitable development strategies that are geographically and community, they're targeted, community-led and driven defined investments in key corridors. So think of the Southwest Equity Coalition in the Southwest Corridor process, the TV Highway Equity Coalition, the 82nd Avenue Coalition. So these are groups that we put together to support how businesses and people can stay in areas as we're looking at making large public investments, in particular in transportation in those corridors. The economic investments area also includes working with partners at GPI and other economic development professionals to define and implement the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, the CEDS, in addition to work supporting the Economic Value Atlas. And then lastly, the brownfields work in that group looks regionally at deploying EPA funds to assess brownfields to support cleanup efforts around the region. They've worked with our Parks Department to assess the Willamette Falls project. They've also been working with the Housing Department to leverage affordable housing bond funds, paired with brownfield assessment funds to get new properties ready for affordable housing development. With that, I'm going to turn over to Rachel to look at revenues and expenditures and FTE.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, Metro Deputy Council President Lewis and members of the council. My name is Rachel Lembo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the finance manager for the Planning, Development, and Research and Housing Departments. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Andy just walked you through a ton of work that our department does. That is funded by over $40 million in our FY 23-24 proposed revenue budget. And the majority of that revenue in our department comes from grants. Our primary transportation grants include MPO funds for transportation planning, FTA grants for our regional travel options program, and competitive grants we've been awarded, such as for TV Highway and Safe Streets for All. These provide funding to program areas of transportation, research, and investment areas, the top three programs you see on that chart.
Excuse me. Can you briefly mention the sources of those grants as you go through your roster?
Sure. I'll back up a little bit to make that clear. So our MPO funds for transportation planning are primarily FHWA, so federal funds, and some FTA. The regional travel options, those are FTA grants, so also federal. And the competitive grants for TV Highway, that was FTA, and Safe Streets for All is FHWA. So all of those transportation grants somehow come from DOT. In land use, the funding primarily comes from our construction excise tax, which funds our 2040 grant program, and a fund exchange with TriMet to fund the transit-oriented development program. We also have federal funds from the EPA for the Brownfields program and EDA for a neighborhood study in partnership with Albina Vision Trust. Over 85% of our funding is restricted. That's the light blue portion of the chart. The unrestricted portion, or the dark blue portion, is our general fund allocation, which we use for land use planning, non-grant funded programs such as community placemaking and economic investments, agency-wide research support, and for the required match on grants. Next slide, please. Moving on to the expense side of our FY 23-24 proposed budget, you can see we've broken it out into three categories here, still the same programs as Andy walked us through, but now we've broken out into personnel, materials and services, and indirect costs. Personnel costs for the department are $12 million, or just over 25% of the overall expense budget. Materials and services costs are $27 million, and this includes $10 million in the TOD program to provide flexibility for land purchases, and approximately $4 million in the 2040 and RTO grant programs, so funding the grant payments to the recipients. The indirect costs account for department leadership and central services cost allocation plan and are allocated across all programs, as you see in the chart. Next slide, please. This slide shows our proposed FY 23-24 FTE of 79, and it's allocated across the programs as shown in the chart. This includes 4 proposed new positions, which Andy is going to talk about in just a moment. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Andy.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. So next slide, please. We were asked for today's presentation to focus in on one departmental equity metric. I would note that the department will provide significant leadership in the coming year, in the coming fiscal year and beyond, advancing racial equity in the update of the Regional Transportation Plan and bringing really a brand new focus on racial equity in the urban growth work in the next year and a half to come. But having said that, looking at sort of more measurable, numerically measurable equity metrics, we want to present today, this is our effort over the past few years to really involve a broader array of people and really increase the diversity of representation on some of the committees and some of the engagement and coordination activities that we're involved in. So we set out a couple of years back to increase the number of folks who were participating through stipend support in the department, taking a deliberate effort to recruit a wider array of community members to advisory committees, engagement committees, et cetera, and supporting them in that process by providing stipends. So one measurement, there are many ways we could measure success in that, is just the simple number of stipends we're providing to community members participating. As you can see on the chart, the number of folks participating over time has increased, but the nature of the engagement that we're putting on. It's sometimes more intense with key corridors, so you might see more activity, more meetings, meaning higher cost of stipends. I see a question on your face potentially, Councilor Nolan. The reason that the budget amount goes down is because of just in our estimation for next year, the amount of engagement. We expect to get to locally preferred alternatives with 2 of the corridor processes, and so they would cease to have as many meetings. So even though we're getting more and more people involved in our committees and processes, we might actually spend less money in total. Go to the next slide. So in building the budget for this cycle, we really focused in on, having heard from council, having heard from an internal budget equity committee, a desire to really shore up the teams and the work that we're doing to ensure that we could do our RTP work, our urban growth work, our corridor work with high quality, with a focus on racial equity, with a focus on climate. That the idea was to really build up structural support for the department. So we are proposing for budget modifications. They're all aimed at providing deeper support for the work that we're already engaged in, both under the budget framework and what we think we heard from council in the budget retreat this last cycle around providing regional leadership in the areas of transportation and land use for our department. So let's go to the next slide. The 4 positions that we are looking at. First is an admin specialist, and this would provide administrative support across the entire department, but with a special focus on modeling, data stewardship, reporting, and data application analytics. So in the research center, this team has not had an admin support at all. Since we've brought them back into the team, they manage a lot of contracts, there's a lot of administrative activity, so providing that support to free staff up to focus more on the actual data work. So that is the first position. The second is a new equity program manager. This position will develop new racial equity goals in areas of the department that don't currently have them, advance progress in those areas where we're already working on racial equity explicitly. Also, we're looking to apply the racial equity lens in project development implementation, including engagement approaches, development of analytics and metrics, and measurement of program project outcomes. So really getting crisper across the department in doing that work. We'd like this position to support ongoing updating and monitoring and reporting on the plan that the department has for racial equity. And lastly, partnering with DEI and HR to develop a toolkit for staff around recruitment to really diversify the pool of candidates that we're able to attract for positions in the department, as well as programs for ongoing staff development and retention. So we're not just hiring a diverse array of candidates, but having them find a place they want to stay and build a career at Metro. The next position, Community Investments Manager, I hinted at this one earlier. This would be a new manager in that broader investment area, land use area, relieving Malou of some of the, we've tasked her with a very deep bench of management, and we think this manager position will help provide additional leadership around community placemaking, inclusive economic development, community-driven equitable development, the categories that I spoke to earlier in one of those categories. The last position, Senior GIS Specialist, this is a new FTE, but would be funded by a grant that we received, thankfully, last February. You may recall a $2.4 million federal Safe Streets for All grant that Metro was awarded. It's not just for Metro, it's a broader array of investments, but we would use some of those resources to support this position to advance equity outcomes and pedestrian safety in the region, as in addition to funds that go out to local partners and consultants. This would be a 2-year limited duration position to match with the duration of that funding. With that, I think I'm going to pass it to Malou. We're going to talk a bit about the areas of our work that apply to the targets.
Great. Good morning, Deputy Council President Lewis, members of the Metro Council. I'm Malou Wilkinson, the Equitable Development and Investment Program Director in the Planning, Development, and Research Department, and I use she, her pronouns. If you can move to the next slide, please, Connor. So I'm just going to briefly touch on how the work that we are doing really aligns with the 3 key areas that the council is working to develop targets for this spring and summer of economy, housing, and the environment. And so I want to highlight a few of the areas of work and not repeat what Andy already told you. So we talked about our partnership with Greater Portland, Inc. In both developing and then working with our local partners to implement the comprehensive economic development strategy. We are also really focusing in our equitable development work on job development and business retention strategies that are community defined and community led. And as Andy said, we're targeting some of the planning and development, the 2040 planning and development grants towards supporting BIPOC-owned small business development and growth. This is something that the council experimented with in 2020, and it has actually been one of our extremely successful components of the 2040 planning and development grant program. And we're excited to potentially launch a new component of that program that's focused on industrial land development readiness to support our regional economy. And our regional freight commodities study it will be part of the regional transportation plan, but that will really focus on the movement of goods through and around our region to support our economy. If we can move to the next slide. So of course, a main focus of our urban growth management work is making sure that we have enough land for housing for the people in our region over the next 20 years, which helps get at our needs for housing. And as Andy mentioned, our transit-oriented development program is going to continue to be investing in affordable housing in areas that have good transit service. Our planning staff will also be supporting the cities in our region as we all work to implement recent state legislation that is requiring local housing production strategies and incorporating those strategies into our urban growth management work. And we'll be collaborating with our housing department. Remember, we used to be together, and we still collaborate a lot with our housing department on a regional housing analysis this fall. Next slide. So on the environment climate side, the newly adopted by the state climate-friendly and equitable communities rules are aimed at promoting transportation improvements and community development that really reduce climate emissions and get our state back on track to meeting climate goals that were established in 2007. Those rules require Metro to do a comprehensive update of the transportation functional plan, which will be something big that we'll be undertaking in 2024. And as Andy mentioned, our modeling and forecasting group is going to be working on updating and refining our modeling tools to better get at understanding the impacts of our different investments on greenhouse gases. They'll be updating the system analysis approach this year in 2023 and kicking off work that will allow us to better understand project level assessments in 2024. We are also currently examining the strategies identified in our original Climate Smart work, assessing their effectiveness and updating the strategies along with the regional transportation plan. And then last, our continued work to implement the 2040 growth concept promotes compact urban form and protecting farm and forest lands, and that is really in itself an effort to promote climate-friendly communities. So I think with that, the next slide, I think
we're ready. Yeah, we're ready for any questions or comments or observations you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That is an excellent high-level overview, and it was really high level.
Yes.
I think that we're going to have a lot of follow-up, and so counselors, let's go through one question each 2 or 3 times, starting with Councilor Rosenthal.
Oh, if I'm limited to one question, I'll start out with, I like the idea of I like the metrics for the equity focus. I noticed there wasn't specific metrics for climate, but I guess my first question is, since we now have a new DEI department, why do we need additional staff to do regional equity management out of the planning department? Isn't that handled inside the new department? Isn't that the appropriate place for it? It strikes me as it might be redundant in some sense.
We actually do have equity program managers in other departments currently. The effort in planning had been, everyone's working on equity, and so we're all embedding it. And I think we've found the need to seek out best practices, better practices, the need to do internal work within our department to set up, to change the culture, it's to strengthen our recruitment process. We've struggled to get candidate pools that are appropriately diverse, and we're beginning to talk with HR about reaching out to universities that provide planning degrees and getting out to juniors and sophomores and starting to put Metro on the map. That's going to require some people, some resource that we don't currently have. So that plus people that can be in the room consistently with our program managers, talking about how to incorporate equity and providing additional skills and insight is the goal of that position. We do have liaisons from DEI, and they provide some of that work, but folks are spread pretty thin in all the work that we're doing across the agency. So we're feeling a real need for additional support and resources with that position.
Great, Councilor Wong.
Great, thank you, Deputy President Lewis. I do have two quick questions I want to put on the record, and maybe they're not that quick. But number one, I see other departments are staffing up with additional tribal liaisons, and I'm wondering the reasoning for planning not going down that route. And I don't know if there's going to be stronger coordination with GAPD and other departments on that front. And then secondly, I want to thank you, Andy, for all your service and covering for this department. And I was wondering, as we deliberate and having a new permanent planning director starting in the next few weeks, do they would have an opportunity to then put their stamp on kind of this upcoming budget, or is there enough flexibility for the new planning director to really shape kind of the department as they see fit?
Mm-hmm. So on the first question, I can wear both hats of government affairs and planning. The positions that are being requested in CAM and in Parks and Nature are specialists around tribal work, looking at historic and other resources. So as we make park improvements, as we purchase land, having a deeper bench of knowledge around permitting questions, the process of identifying and mitigating for potential historic and cultural resources in those places. So it was an effort between government affairs and those two departments to identify sort of the next suite of activities that we really felt would improve the tribal affairs program overall. So not so much tribal liaisons within each department as much as a specific need that government affairs team fully supports, and it's a lot of that's coming out of our actual engagement with tribes and the kind of suggestions they're making for how we can improve our processes and develop a deeper bench of skills at Metro. In the planning department, we don't do as much acquisition of land that we're going to own. We're not constructing things in the way that the Parks Department is. But there's more work to do across the agency, and I think these were the first set of steps that the Tribal Affairs Program is proposing. Let's see, on your second question, I don't know if you have. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. Hello, councilors. I can jump in here. I think knowing that we had a new planning director coming on, we didn't make any, sudden moves in this budget proposal. There are some modest changes, but really, overall, structurally and financially, things remain, as they have been. And I think that gives the new planning director stability coming in, but also, as she, gets her feet on the ground and it kind of assesses what her needs are and the strengths of the department, I think that there's some flexibility to make changes in the following fiscal year. And then, of course, by the time we're in this process again in 2024, she will have had a full year to really assess how she wants to structure the teams and, where we may need to add or subtract various resources. So, I believe that, at the point that you adopt the budget, she does have latitude to move things around within that appropriation.
Great. Counselor Nolan?
Thank you, Madam President. First question, and I'll assume there is a second round as you suggested. I am interested in the slide about climate smart integration into the RTP. And I know we don't have a lot of time to go into details here, but I'd like to understand what the essence of that will be and how it will change. Will it change? Presumably we're investing in it so that we can get more information to adjust our approach to the RTP. How do you envision that playing out?
Well, first off, I would say, so the Regional Transportation Plan is a federally required document. They don't require us to add some of the things that we choose to add in the region. So an active transportation plan, our addition of the state required climate smart plan. So part of highlighting that is simply that we're doing some things that other regions may not be doing because it's not federally required. In terms of the process for how that's being integrated, we may not have the exact right people up here today to respond to that question, but we would be more than happy to come back and talk about with Kim Ellis, with other staff, about the process through which we're evaluating projects and applying the goals of the Climate Smart plan within the RTP.
And thank you for that. And I know we can't get into a detailed conversation, but what I'm really interested in is we referenced our own climate smart policy and the state's greenhouse gas policy. And we also know that since both of those policies have been adopted and implemented, we have regressed. The situation is worse. We have a bigger hole to dig out of. That's what I'm interested in knowing how this will change.
And that will be the discussion of the coming months around the projects that are coming into the Regional Transportation Plan, our analysis of those projects, and that will be coming before you and JPACT in the next 2 months, I believe.
Let's take it offline.
Okay.
Okay, let's do a second round of questions. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Interim Chair Lewis. First of all, I want to say that I have a great deal of confidence and respect for staff that manage both to anticipate the future needs as well as to manage the current situations. I mean, I've been very impressed over the last several years in the ability to do that. That doesn't mean I don't have questions, and I have to admit that I am still not entirely comfortable with moving the research department into planning. I'm used to a situation where Regional Information Systems is a separate entity. I still like that model, but nonetheless, it seems to work, and I think that's great. My question, and you brought it up on the last slide, is protecting of farmland. And this is pretty appropriate because I just got lobbied by one of Councilor Lewis's constituents the other day about the need to protect farmland within the urban reserves area and whether we have or have any programs that would particularly work to encourage agricultural easements in that area. And I'm wondering if that's something that is part of the planning department or is that land use? And is that something that we have considered?
Can I just clarify, you're asking about rural reserves or urban reserves?
Inside urban reserves, but agricultural lands that may be in undesignated areas, but they're inside the urban reserves. I know that we don't have jurisdiction outside of in the rural reserves very much, but maybe there's programs for that as well. You could answer both.
Well, in the urban and rural reserves, intergovernmental agreements that were adopted as a part of solidifying rural reserves, urban reserves, and then undesignated sit outside of that because they're literally don't have a designation.
Right.
The counties have agreed to not make any upzoning changes in urban reserve areas in order to continue having them as places that we could choose to expand into for future urban growth. In other words, we don't want lots of small development that would preclude the opportunity to get the kind of missing middle housing and more intense development that we're seeing proposed in areas like the Tigard UGB expansion that you just considered. So those are areas that the region has said we are looking to in the future potentially for urban growth, and we want to actually protect them for those purposes. Whereas the rural reserves would be the areas where we might be trying to figure out how to help ensure that farming can continue and other agricultural uses could continue. That is within Malou's group within the planning department. I don't know if you want to add anything more.
I think the point that by having an urban growth boundary and having urban reserves and rural reserves, we are aiming to protect farm and forest land with our overall 2040 vision. We are not looking at easements in urban reserves to protect farmland within those areas right now. That's not in our current work program.
As you know, there was some concern from one agricultural owner out in the area that we traded, and there was some concern about protecting the values that had already been committed, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just wondering if we were doing anything to protect those agricultural uses within, when they're not necessarily natural resources. I mean, obviously we protect natural resources if it's stream corridor, et cetera, or it's a critical spring or something like that. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Nolan?
Thanks, Madam President. I didn't forget the point where you observed my facial reaction to your presentation. And I understand that when you were putting forward the single equity metric, that it is a single metric. But I would like you to address what else more substantively the department is aiming for equitable outcomes. The metric you put forward, which is creating pathways and number of individuals participating in those pathways, seems to me an outcome. It's an output. It's a number of widgets rather than an outcome that affects people outside these walls. Mm-hmm. Your measure is to impact 50 some odd people. If a third of our population is BIPOC, which the numbers tell us it is, that's over 600,000 people. So 55 is, shall we say, a bit puny. So what do you have that are grander ambitions and commitments?
And this is the challenge of trying to develop a numerically trackable equity metric. But I would say those community engagement opportunities, those advisory committees are weighing in on items that come up to this council and you act upon. So it's more than just 50 individuals in that case. Setting that aside, I would say the work we're doing in the Regional Transportation Plan, which has evolved over a number of years, it's not new in this cycle of identifying equity areas and looking at projects and examining projects around how they're advancing outcomes in safety, in transit, and mobility in those equity areas is an outcome-oriented way of redoing the way we approached our RTP plan. So this dates back to the last RTP, where for the first time we had very significant, robust engagement out in the community. We funded community organizations to outreach more deeply. We brought those conversations back into meetings of JPACT, and I don't remember if we did joint meetings of MPAC and JPACT at that time. But we were putting people speaking for their communities on the stage in front of the decision makers who were helping to build the regional transportation plan. We've built on that in this process with ongoing engagement with communities of color in particular, really trying to bring those voices to the decision-making table. So that's an example. It's harder to create numeric metrics around that, but we are evaluating all the projects coming in to this proposed RTP based on racial equity among other factors. So that's one example. Coming up in the next urban growth cycle, we're working right now we're working with DEI and working with our staff, especially staff and research, who I've got to say are really jazzed about some new ways of looking at urban growth and thinking about who has benefited. We talk about the 6 desired outcomes and sharing the benefits and burdens of regional growth. Who has benefited from urban growth boundary expansions over time? What impact have UGB expansion areas in terms of housing type, housing price, access to brand new infrastructure that's created along with new areas? What has that had on other parts of the region? What's the demographic makeup of historic UGB expansion areas like North Bethany as compared to newer expansion areas like Villebois? So those are the kind of questions that we want to start asking and inquiring on identifying the right data sets to pull together. And I think we'd really enjoy further conversation with you all about how to do that work, how to innovate in the urban growth space around racial equity in particular. So just two examples in the two major areas we'll work on.
Thank you. And I do want to acknowledge and appreciate all the work that Marisa has infused into this budget process around trying to understand the tangible, the measurable outcomes of what we do from a racial equity point of view. I am eager for us to be running marathons in this, if we can use an earlier analogy. And I understand, although I am impatient about it, that we're still in the phase we're getting out of crawling and into walking on our own. But I'm looking forward to the marathon.
If I may, Deputy Council President, councilors, I think, what I hear when I look at planning's equity metric, it is a handful of folks when you look at the large population, but there's a theory of change behind measuring that, and the theory is that if we diversify and improve the community capacity to engage in these conversations, that the decisions that we make will be better for community, and therefore the outcomes for community will be better. It all connects in. We might be measuring this one little thing, but there's a belief backed by data that if we do this, this larger outcome will be met. So I think it is challenging to pick just one, but I think it's important for us to hold, that each of these has a larger community level outcome in mind. That we might measure, in health outcomes or, in prosperity, shared prosperity. So just wanted to, that's what was coming up for me in that conversation, wanted to share and have us all hold that. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that we probably each have some offline questions and some digging that we want to do. Does anybody want to give us one final question? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I'm going to move us along to item 4.5 for the purpose of the Budget Committee. Nope, 4.4. Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department budget presentation with Marta McGuire, our Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Director, who will give us our presentation, and then we will have questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Metro Deputy Council President Lewis and councilors. Again, my name is Marta McGuire and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Metro's Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department. I have here with me Carrie Stacy, who is our Deputy Director that started here just this past summer, not new to Metro, but new to our department in WPES. I'm looking forward to sharing with you the details of our budget today and hopefully connecting the budget with the solid waste fee conversations that we're having that funds our programs and services. And we can go ahead and pull up the slide deck. I want to take a moment just to point out this photo. This is a photo taken at St. John's Landfill. It's one of my favorites because I feel like it really represents the interconnections of the work that we do at Metro and taking a landfill and turning it into a community asset that people can enjoy. Next slide. I'm going to follow a similar structure as the planning department as we go through our budget that is shown up here. Next slide. And I want to just start off around the primary mission for our department, which is to protect people in the environment and doing that through managing garbage and recycling safely for people and businesses. Our operating budget falls into 3 key areas that are shown here. The first one is around services and community investment, and that includes a number of our community services that we provide, including cleaning up dumped garbage, advancing waste reduction through grants and partnerships and education, The second area is planning and partnerships. So that's much of the work that we do with cities and counties throughout the region to reduce impacts of waste through policy and regulation. And the third area is regional garbage recycling and operations. As you know, we own and operate 2 public transfer stations, as well as management of the St. John's landfill. Today, I'm going to be sharing a budget to deliver on our responsibilities that aims to keep within the 8% fee ceiling. I also want to point out that we're really at a pivotal time of change and opportunity. Changes in climate have impacted our facilities and services. The social and economic landscape has really highlighted the gaps in the current system, and the implementation of the state's Recycling Modernization Act is really calling for significant changes in the system that we collectively manage with communities and partners in the region. The proposed budget that we'll be walking through today will address the short-term needs to support our current services, but there are larger, more systemic discussions ahead for us to address the improvements needed to modernize the system and reach our collective goals. And I'm really looking forward to having those conversations with you. Next slide. Getting into the details of our budget, this is our operating budget broken down by the major categories. Materials and services is our largest portion of our budget, followed by personnel. Currently, we have approximately 190 staff within the department, and we are proposing to add 1 new position and moving 1 additional position from limited duration to full-time, and I'll talk more about that. In addition to our operating budget, we have a capital improvements plan with major equipment and capital improvements at our facilities. We have unrestricted reserve that includes our 45-day operating fund and a restricted fund balance for the management of St. John's landfill. Next slide. To give you slightly a different view of our budget from there, this slide breaks down our budget according to the major program areas that I just walked through. And you can see that garbage and recycling operations makes up the majority of our budget. This is also the area that we have the most fixed costs, both for personnel as well as for the contracts to operate the 2 major transfer stations. Our 2 most significant cost increases, and we touched on this a little bit last week, are for operational increases for the transfer station contracts, as well as administrative increases for the cost allocation plan that funds our central services. Next slide. These areas can be further broken up into our specific lines of service and programs. Last week, we discussed approaches to our fees that funds this year's budget, and the table here shows which programs are funded by which fees. The solid waste fee funds our transfer stations, and the regional system fee funds all the other programs in services and community investment and planning and partnership. So it's important to keep in mind that the regional system fee funds all the programs that are focused on waste reduction, including our efforts to address consumption, waste prevention, reuse, and reuse efforts. Next slide. This slide provides a little bit more detail on our capital improvement projects that are funded by our solid waste reserves. Our planned capital improvements include both large-scale projects as well as renewal and replacement at our facilities. The biggest change in this area is a proposal to council for the purchase of the RID Deployment Center that is currently a leased facility. As you know, the fee scenarios under consideration include approaches that may affect our capital improvement budget, and so depending on council's direction, we may need to prioritize what's in next year's proposed capital improvement plan based on the budget. Next slide. Now I want to move into the key priorities that guide our budget and key equity metrics for measuring our progress. I got permission to include a couple of additional metrics in our presentation, but I'll try and move through these. Next slide. Our work is guided by the Regional Waste Plan, which is both a vision for Greater Portland's garbage and recycling system, as well as a blueprint for action. And this slide features our strategic priorities that are rooted in the plan's goals and values. Some of the major priority projects that are underway that I want to highlight include the System Facilities Plan that is shaping our future investments to modernize the garbage and recycling system, and the Bulky Waste Policy Project that is evaluating different collection models to make improvements to bulky waste collection services with the goal of providing regularly occurring bulky waste collection for all residents in the region. Next slide. Our most recent progress report was released in January, and it shares data on our progress to date on plan implementation. On the left, you'll see the strategic priorities. In the middle are indicators of progress, and on the right, our progress to date with the reporting year of 2021. Some of our key equity metrics are circled here in yellow. And Councilor Nolan, I really appreciate your comment about there can be, widgets or numbers that go in, but there's also outcomes and other things that can't be measured in numbers. And so we're very aware of that as we look at our measurements and help to supplement that with other types of qualitative data. Next slide. One of the first indicators that I want to touch on relates to our work on workforce equity, and it is the median hourly wage. This indicator tracks the hourly median wage for jobs in garbage and recycling by race, ethnicity, gender, and occupation type. Last year, the department made progress in this area, including living wage adjustments for Metro staff and our transfer station contracted employees. And this reflects progress toward our goal with the median wage increasing by 12%. Currently, the data that we have covers only Metro staff as well as our contracted staff through Recology for the transfer stations, but our hope is in future years that we can incorporate wage and demographic data for workers in other sectors of the industry. Next slide. To speak to an item that's not a number, I think it's also important to share a success story that links the strategic priority of fostering inclusive prosperity in our system with our recycling internship program that we have. Here's a quote from an intern who participated in the program in 2021. And as a part of this 2-year program, interns develop essential skills, they tour local facilities, they participate in job shadows, and network with peers and mentors across the agency. And I believe this helps create those career pathways and opportunity and access to increase the diversity of our workforce. Next slide. This next indicator focuses on our goals for reducing the impact of trash and improving services. In the short term, we've seen significant progress in the collection of dumped garbage. Our RID team has been working hard, and you can see the tons of dumped garbage by RID has increased compared to prior years. Over the long term, we do want to see this indicator decrease of the tons needing to be cleaned up as a reflection of individuals having affordable and convenient access to services. Next slide. I also want to highlight the way that local government and community partners are showing up to clean up the region. Launched in 2021, Metro's Regional Refresh Fund supports community-led efforts to promote livability and increase garbage and recycling service equity. This slide here features a local event for bulky waste collection and neighborhood litter pickup, and this is just one of the examples of organizations and local governments that are hosting cleanup events using the Regional Refresh Fund since it's launched. We are proposing to establish this as a long-term program for next fiscal year. Next slide. The last indicator I want to touch on is the annual tons of waste generated. This is not a key equity metric, but it's one that has come up in conversation. What we want to see is the total tons of waste stay the same, or better yet, decline over time, regardless of whether the waste was disposed or recovered. This data shows that we are moving in the opposite direction of the indicator goal. Of the total waste generated in 2021, 53% was sent to landfills and 47% was recovered for recycling, composting, or producing energy. I will also add, Councilor Rosenthal, in one of our prior conversation, you have requested data on per capita generation and recovery, and we have gathered that information, and I will be sharing the details of that following this session. Next slide. I'd like to move into next our budget modifications. WPES has conducted a series of forums to collect feedback from local governments and industry that helped shape our budget proposal, and I want to just touch on those before I walk through the modifications. Next slide. This slide captures what we heard at each of the forums, and across these there was feedback on balancing costs with services, continued focus on equity, resilience, and transparency, increasing efforts in specific programs such as collection events, and we use this information to inform our budget modifications. Next slide. As you know, WPES, the cost for services have increased, why we anticipate less tonnage overall. So we have really limited the proposed additions and looked to reallocate resources where possible within our current budget. Our proposed modifications include, in response to local government feedback, restoring inflationary adjustments for their grant funding. We provide per capita grants to cities and counties throughout the region to support waste reduction that primarily fund positions within those jurisdictions. Prior to COVID, we had provided an inflationary adjustments for those grants, and this looks at restoring that. The second area, as I mentioned, is establishing the Regional Refresh Program as a long-term program. We've really seen the benefits of this and helping fill some of the interim gaps of the system and providing that support to our local communities. And the last area is building capacity within our standards and compliance program with the addition of 1 FTE. And this will provide additional capacity to support the development and implement of consistent standards and requirements for new types of solid waste facilities and recycling, as well as ensure that Metro's existing facilities are complying with Metro's requirements. Next slide. The last area that I want to walk through are key investments for Council's target areas and share some metrics that highlight some of the outcomes of the investments to date. Next slide. The first area is environment, and this is an area of investment across the department's programs and services, but I want to lift up 4 key areas for your consideration. First, our investment into managing household hazardous waste. By state law, we are required to provide collection for these materials. We do this through our 2 permanent facilities that collected more than 3 million pounds in the last year. In addition, we serve thousands of customers through our collection events, both small and large, throughout the region. We know that these are in high demand, and we are thinking creatively about how we can better expand access to these services for those communities, both in the equity zones and those who are far away from the permanent facilities. And we have reallocated existing positions within our budget to expand capacity in this work. And so you'll see some of our targets for next fiscal year for these events. The second area of investment includes regional efforts to increase the recovery of food scraps to help advance progress toward our climate goals. Our investment of more than $1 million includes funding to local governments to support positions, as well as purchasing containers and access to service payments for haulers to help offset the collection or the transport of food scraps to further implement this requirement. Lastly, our responsibility to oversee private solid waste operation and facilities in the region to minimize health and environmental impacts. This is an area we are requesting a budget modification, and this is where we play an important role of ensuring the proper disposal of waste through authorizations and inspection and ensuring the collection of fees and taxes. We need additional capacity in this space to help address the new types of facilities that facilities and operations that are seeking authorizations from Metro, such as special waste, medical waste, and sludge processors that are coming into the region for operation. Next slide. The second target areas includes investment in economy and environment, and this includes direct investments into businesses and local communities, living wage jobs created through our community cleanup and Metro Paint, and reducing environmental impacts through the collection of dumped garbage and paint recycling. I want to share that the metrics both on this slide and the last slide really don't represent the true outcomes of these programs, and there are benefits that cannot be captured in the numbers represented here, but we wanted to give you some measure of the work that we're doing. As we look ahead, we see key opportunities in these areas. First is considering future opportunities for our investment in an innovation grant program. Since 2018, this program has invested more than $10 million in strengthening the reuse, repair, composting, and recycling programs through capital and program grants. The current capital grants are limited to $500,000 for capital investments, and there is an opportunity to consider how we may structure the grant program to support larger investments to increase jobs, reduce climate impacts through public-private partnerships with industry and reuse organizations. I want to just acknowledge and thank the reuse organizations that were here today, the Rebuilding Center and Community Warehouse. It's wonderful to have their voice at this table and see them drawing the connections to the goals in the regional waste plan and opportunities for investments as we look forward. The second area, we will be continuing our work to expand the workforce transition program in the next year, both to support our goals around cleanup and shared prosperity. And the third area includes Metro Paint, where we've made significant progress in advancing workforce equity. The council had moved our contracted positions to Metro permanent positions. We've also made improvements to safety and operations, including a new paint filtration system. And next year, the program will be developing a business plan to update its business model to develop a strategy to increase cost recovery while meeting its recycling, workforce, and community service goals. And I just want to note that all of these programs that I'm walking through here are funded by the regional system fee. And the last area that I want to touch on is just to note our investment in providing safe, well-maintained, environmentally sound public operations. And we can move to the next slide. As you know, our department's portfolio includes 7 different operational sites across the region. Last year, council approved positions that allowed us to establish a new division in the department to address safety, environmental, and capital improvement needs. This is definitely an area that we have work to do. Conditions assessments were completed this year for the transfer stations that are going to help provide us a path and a plan to further inform our maintenance and improvement needs. As a department with these additional resources and divisions, we are better positioned to address the existing needs. And looking ahead, as a part of the facilities plan for future improvements, we'll need to determine a long-term financial strategy for maintaining our existing and future assets. So this concludes our presentation, and I will hand it back to Deputy Council President Lewis.
Thank you so much, Marta. That was a wonderful presentation. A really big department with, frankly, so many different pieces moving. So let's do questions. A question per counselor. We'll rotate through. At this point, I can probably estimate 2, maybe 3 times. Who has questions or items for further discussion? Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, and Chair Lewis. Yeah, that was a good presentation. I appreciate it. I do have to mention the regional refresh. We've been making presentations to city councils, and they're keen on this, and they want to know more, and they want to know how to apply. And so it's sort of like they're jumping on like a dog on a bone. So I think this may be something that may be a winner. I just made that comment. My question is, of course, I suppose the obvious question is, so how do we respond to the reuse facilities? In other words, their comment was that I&I is not sufficient to really give them the kind of resources they need to move forward. What are our goals for reuse, and is there a different response than we have to these community warehouse and the rebuilding center and others that do this reuse?
Part of there's opportunity to think about how that program may be restructured. We have appropriations for $2 million within that program and on an annual basis. And one opportunity is to take a look at that program, to get direction from council to take a look at that program next year, to think about how it may be restructured. Right now, it has the capital grants that are $500,000 and smaller programmatic grants. You've served on that committee. So there is an opportunity to think about a larger grant, a targeted partnership. There's a wide range, and we see that opportunity. That program's been in place for a number of years to think about, is it getting to the outcomes that you want? Are there different opportunities that council may want to take more targeted investments and partnerships with that funding, with those resources that we currently have?
Okay, thank you.
For Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. I want to dig a little deeper on the question that Councilor Rosenthal raised. From a perspective of a utility, if I'm seeing a growing demand, I have 2 choices, basically, to address it. I can either build more capacity to handle the growth I'm expecting, or I can go upstream and make investments that lower that demand before it happens, so that I don't have to invest in that expensive new facility. And that's the way I heard what the rebuilding center and the community warehouse were asking. And I don't expect an answer here today unless you've already analyzed it. But it would seem to me wise for us to explore with as fresh a perspective as we can while the system is operating. What's the cost of each incremental ton or each incremental 10,000 tons? And what are the different ways we could achieve it? Expand facilities, improve recovery of material so it doesn't get there. It's not something we can do before we need to set rates and tell our local partners this year what to expect. But it is an opportunity to do what Metro does really well and what your department is really grabbing onto under your leadership, and that is to think ahead and think creatively. Don't be stuck with the way we've done things before.
Absolutely. I feel like historically we primarily focused on the end of life, looking at how we can just manage the disposal of materials versus widening that scope to not only look at reuse and repair, but preventing the waste in the first place, redesigning what the products look like so there's less packaging, less toxicity within those products as well, because that's where there's an even more significant, environmental benefit that isn't necessarily quantified in some of the metrics around annual, waste tonnage, where we're just looking strictly at weight. I do, but when we're looking ahead in those larger system conversations that we have, I believe the facilities system plan will help daylight those conversations for us to look at. Where do we want to make those investments? There's still a cost when we're shifting materials from the garbage stream to a higher use, such as reuse, repair, because we still need a system to manage those, to transport them, to house them. So there's still a cost, but we need to figure out, is it a less cost, like what are the cost differences between managing the materials in those senses, but there's a stronger environmental and social benefit when we look towards council's goals on increasing jobs, on reducing climate impact. I also believe the Recycling Modernization Act is shifting our direction upstream. We're moving upstream in that moment. There is this really beautiful window of opportunity in my 2 decades at Metro that I have never seen. And so this is the time now with an aging system and our current landscape for us to really dig in and figure out how we want to shape that system. But I hope to get to those questions as a part of the conversations that we will have around the facilities plan, because we'll have to make those choices around where we want to make those investments and how we can move materials in our system to benefit our communities.
Amen. Thank you.
Councilor Wong.
Oh, great. Thank you, Deputy President, and thanks for a comprehensive presentation. And this question is partially for you and partially for Marisa. Just listening to the community partners that came in earlier, has there been some thinking about busting kind of our silos within Metro and thinking about other potentially shared programs that could be done? Like one example is I believe that the program areas that Community Warehouse does is really complementary and potentially even eligible for SHS funding. I wonder if there's an opportunity to have some interdepartment conversation about, these objectives that these partners have fit your goals, but also the goals of our housing and supportive housing work. And, I think we're looking at each individual department kind of on its own in a silo, but we're talking about greater outcomes that we want to see, in the broader community, and different departments do different pieces. So, that might be something that I would like to see more thinking about is, you do your piece and another department does another. How do you kind of integrate that into something that a little more comprehensive with kind of the outcomes that we're looking for in mind?
Yeah, a house's need furniture. There's definitely an opportunity there.
Absolutely agree. I think we can look at the restrictions around the SHS funding to see just, how, it's interesting because we're not funding any of the supportive housing services programs directly. We push them through to the counties, but I think that there's still an opportunity to look at those connections. And I mean, it's an incredible piece of data. What they shared with us is that as more people are getting housed with this other funding of Metro, their need to increase capacity is popping up in this other area, and I think that speaks to how interconnected we are, but also how important it is to be in community with our partners in the reuse and repair world, so that we can watch those trends and look at how we might better align. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think there could be some opportunity there, and we just have to figure out exactly what path that funding flows and how to loop those things together.
Yeah, I mean, I did a tour of Community Warehouse and really, got to understand their mission. And it's like when folks are moving into new housing and it's an empty apartment, we just have multiple win-win scenarios that if we were able to organize might, come to fruition. Thanks.
Agree. Thank you.
Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. A pretty nerdy question here coming up. I noticed on one of your slides you referenced $750,000 investment in the upgrade of the point of sale system. I have been involved in a number of computer system upgrades in my career, as the implementer, as the funder, as the partner. And in that experience, and from what the auditors are telling us, one of the mistakes people make is thinking that their system is so unique that it needs to be built up uniquely custom for that service. And I am hoping that we are looking very seriously at COTS systems, commercial off-the-shelf systems, and considering whether we might make some adjustments if it doesn't fit exactly, because the access to technical support and ongoing support for a COTS system is much better than a built-in house system. And you're nodding your heads, and it looks to me like you're a few steps ahead of me.
I can speak to that a little bit. Yes, we do recognize the challenges of customizing software, and I think we've seen that elsewhere in our department. And the RFP has been released. We have 14 potential bidders, and the executive team for that project is meeting both today and Monday to talk about our project management plan and criteria for looking at those vendors. But we have spoken about off-the-shelf products. I think we recognize also that the current tool that we have, although it is still working, it is complex, and then it needs to interface with a number of our other systems that inform our data streams and our financial systems. But I hear you, and we want as simple a tool as possible, and I have seen in my experience that customizing makes it harder to upgrade and keep a tool maintaining as long as we would like it to. So I appreciate your opinion on that. And it is.
You've just demonstrated, Ms. McGuire, how smart you are in picking the people who support you.
Yes. Very lucky to have Carrie with us.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. Yeah, first of all, I want to say I'm glad to see that allocating specific resources for updating that financial tracking system. It's an important element and something that, and that you're looking at off-the-shelf systems as well. But I want to talk about something else. I want to go all the way back to the movie The Graduate. The future is in plastics. Okay, some of you, I was around then, and some of you may have seen the movie, but the future turns out to be in plastics, but not.
There was more to that movie, I recall.
I was a chemist. I thought it was all about plastics. It was about love? I don't know. But anyway, The future in plastics seems to be a little bit harsher than what we originally thought. So I'm just wondering, and we've done great work with paint and with hazardous waste, and plastics don't quite qualify, but is there some thought that maybe we may need to have a focus, a special focus on plastics? We're an ocean bordering state, and what we do here affects things through the Columbia River fairly directly. I'm just wondering if we have enough emphasis on, I noticed also in the INIs that there were some proposals for dealing with plastics, and do we have the resources to really evaluate whether these are appropriate, whether they can be implemented at larger scale, and whether we can have some real ways of reducing the plastics generation and disposal in our area? I mean, that's a big question, I admit, and it's sort of a little bit hypothetical, but I appreciate an attempt. Thank you.
We know that plastics is a high impact material when it comes to the environment, hence the work on, banning of disposal of single-use plastic bags. And I know there's been other technologies. This isn't an area that I would want to follow up with you on, where I have additional staff that work more closely in this area. Right now, our primary focus has been on those larger bulky waste items, but I do think plastics will come up as a part of the conversation in the facility system plan too, when we look at the particular materials, but it isn't something that we're focused on in this moment in our programs.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wong.
Yes, thank you. I was also wondering if there might be some more investment or thought for longer term strategic planning. And I know we have conversations every year, and it's like every year we think about how we might reshape the system. Especially as, we have the goals of decreasing waste that ends up in our landfill, but a lot of our revenues are tied to that. So I'd just like to have a more kind of like defined process of how we might have those conversations with our community partners, and, not just wait to budget season, and then I feel like we punt it until the next year, and that's kind of a cycle that I've observed in my short time. So yeah, just wondering, if there was like longer term planning, both for the facilities front, but also kind of like in how a system is basically organized.
So for our department, we're guided by the 2030 Regional Waste Plan. So that is essentially our long-range strategic plan. It covers a decade plus. It was adopted in 2019, and it has 19 goals and 109 actions, and that's where we are tying our work to. On roughly a 3-year basis, we develop short-term work plans with cities and counties to identify what priorities we are working on within that plan. And part of what I shared today was sort of the boiling down of the strategic priorities and how we're measuring progress. So we work towards having those conversations both with cities and counties and in our current relationships with community partners and industry. Much of that plan is non-directive in nature. It's aspirations and commitments that we've made both with community, industry, and local government partners for shared implementation. There are components of it that are directive in that we're placing requirements on local governments, such as service standards for multifamily or single family. But that's what we've used as our strategic plan. As we look forward and council is setting targets within those specific areas, I do think there is perhaps an additional layer as we look short term related to the budget, that we can have those conversations to make sure that our work is sort of sinking into that. But that's the general framework that we use now. But certainly there's opportunity for adapting it and evolving from there. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I understand there's a 10-year vision, but, I think how do we be more ambitious in what it looks like to reimagine, the system that the region kind of deserves. So I think there's balancing kind of like the day-to-day operations with, the broader kind of aspirational goals that we have. And then, just wanting for there to be a place to be more intentional about that.
Yeah.
Great conversation, counselors. Do we want to do one more round of questions? Okay. We will probably have some more offline discussion. I'm particularly intrigued about figuring out where we have opportunities for a reuse warehouse within our landscape, and that part of the system is really, really important. So thank you for the questions there. With that, I'm going to bring us to our next agenda item, 4.5, which is for the purpose of the Budget Committee to deliberate on FY 23-24 proposed budget. And our Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Andrew Scott, and our Financial Officer, Brian Kennedy, are here to answer additional questions for our deliberation.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. I have snuck back into my spot. Deputy Chief Operating Officer is at our Employee Awards, Service Awards ceremony one floor away. So you have me and Brian Kennedy, our CFO.
Great. I'm glad Andrew got to sneak away to that lunch. So folks, do we have questions or discussion? And if not, we'll go back to our public hearing.
Deputy Council President Lewis, we don't have any presentation today. I wanted to provide a couple quick reminders. First is that the first opportunity for councilors to propose amendments to the budget is next Thursday, the 27th. So that would be amendments to the proposed budget. And again, that is not your only opportunity. If any amendments are proposed, they will be considered on May 9th, which is also the date of the next public hearing on the budget after today's public hearing. And then there is another opportunity to make changes to the approved budget at that stage. Budget amendment forms went to your policy advisors today. And so if you have any questions about that process, you can reach out to me directly or reach out to your policy advisor. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So seeing no additional discussion right now, I'm going to move us back into our public hearing on the budget. Connor, could you please remind the audience of our procedures?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. So if anyone wishes to testify on the FY 2023-24 proposed budget, now is the time to do so. Once again, if you're just joining us, public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll be managing a timer to go off at that 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. You can do so if you're joining us in person by bringing up a blue card for me from the back of the room. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can sign up by raising your hand. The raise hand button is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab, depending on your version of Zoom. As a reminder to folks, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, I will give folks just another couple of seconds to get their hands up. Councilors, no one has signed up in advance to testify today on this topic. And just giving another moment or two. And Deputy Council President Lewis, I don't see any hands up.
Cool, great. Seeing no further discussion, I will close the public hearing. And I will move us on to the end of our agenda. And Marisa, if you could please give us our COO communication for the day.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. Hello again, councilors. Just wanted to give you a quick update today on the Nature and Neighborhood Community Choice Grants. Andrew Scott, our DCOO, had the privilege of attending the kickoff meeting / idea generating event a few weeks ago at Shute Park Library and was genuinely impressed with the enthusiasm and creativity of attendees. The event was held in partnership with park providers Beaverton, Forest Grove, Hillsborough, THPRD, and Washington County, and they had about 50 people stop by for snacks and activities. The Community Choice Program is unique among Metro's grant programs. Rather than soliciting project ideas from established organizations and working with committees to select grantees, the Community Choice Grants Program is taking ideas directly from community members. Everyone in the region aged 11 or older will be able to vote for their favorite projects. The pilot grant program for this project is now officially live and accepting parks and nature project ideas from our community members across the region, and ideas can be submitted until May 14th. The Community Choice Grant Pilot has $2 million in funding to support projects in Western Washington County. The Nature and Neighborhoods Capital Grant Program is also underway. They received 16 letters of intent in the initial round, and 10 projects have been invited to submit a full application by the end of this month. The proposed projects range from outdoor classrooms to large-scale restoration projects to public plazas to nature playgrounds. Staff will be convening an external committee to help review applications in May with the hope of bringing a slate of grant awards for council consideration and approval this June. And that's all I have for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. I wanted the council to know that I attended the Oversight Committee for the Affordable Housing Bond Measure yesterday. The committee's preparing to deliver its annual report to the council. Lots of good, lively discussion about understanding the momentum that the program has developed, and support for the priorities that staff has advocated for 23. But I wanted to specifically draw your attention to a couple items that were highlighted in some of the conversation yesterday. One is adding home ownership programs to this bond, and I believe it was Emily Lieb, one of the staff persons, said that they're looking at their first possibility for a home ownership investment with this program, which is pretty exciting and something that is responsive to and that the Oversight Committee will be looking forward to more discussion about. Given the status of commitment of funds under this bond measure, we might be able to do a pilot program or two, but it could be something that we really look to integrating more deeply into any successor bond measure that we bring to the voters. The two other topics that were of significant discussion yesterday were regulatory and permitting streamlining. This is one that the committee members acknowledged is not directly within Metro's authority, but it is an area where Metro could provide technical assistance to the implementing 7 agencies, and also could be a convener for conversations with those housing development agencies and the local, mostly city permitting departments, and we could perhaps add value that way. And the final topic was diversity data and some discussion about the value of it so that we can fulfill our commitments and our vision, balanced against the cost of collecting such data and how that is born. I won't editorialize because I'm only reporting on their conversation today, but we should be looking for those topics to come forward to us. Good conversation, very, very engaged group, and very sophisticated in their understanding of these issues.
Excellent. Councilor Wong.
Oh, great. Thank you, Deputy President. I just wanted to report that President Peterson, Councilor Simpson, and I had the privilege of joining the Northwest Chambers of Commerce from Portland and Seattle on a trip to DC earlier this week. And we were able to talk to both congressional delegations of the Northwest on transportation funding, federal support in addressing our housing and homelessness crisis, additional investment in our semiconductor industry, and also addressing kind of the workforce shortages through immigration reform and workforce development. And overall, it was very well received, and we're looking forward to partnership with the region and also the congressional delegation. Thanks.
Wonderful, and we're glad to have you back. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. Just first thing I want to report, I attended a public forum held by the legislature in Charbonneau. It was on tolling, particularly the Boone Bridge, It was interesting. People were very concerned. About 350 people, which I think is about a quarter of the entire population of Charbonneau. Let's just say they were a bit up in arms and not particularly happy with the project. And then I just want to note that, as everybody probably knows, the Saturday is Earth Day, so I encourage everybody to do something good for the planet. And I want to quote the classic quote from Pogo: "We have met the enemy, and they is us." And so it's time to pay attention.
Thank you, Counselor. One report back from me, JPAC met this morning with our chair on the road. I chaired, and Counselor Wong was able to attend in his alternate capacity. We didn't have any votes this morning, but lots of meaty, good discussion items, including the MTIP and the Unified Work Plan, UPWP, and a high-level discussion of what is on the project list for the draft RTP. So good discussions all around, and we also were able to hear some good updates from across the region. And just a reminder on that front that our letter to ODOT is due in at 4 p.m. tomorrow for 205 tolling. Our PAs have had drafts in their inbox and have been working with us, believe since Monday, but it's come to my attention that some people might be a little behind in getting that. So please all dig into your inbox and offer any comments and edits. Any other business? I don't think so. So seeing no further discussion, I'll adjourn the council meeting. Our next regular meeting is scheduled 10:30 a.m. at April 25th. Have a great day.